Greetings, Susquehanna Valley Presbytery. This report is on yesterday's business of the General Assembly, the 226th General Assembly. But before I tell you about yesterday's, let me go back and share with you what I didn't say. I overlooked one item, and that was a very important item. I failed to mention that our denomination took on July 1st, on Monday. The General Assembly elected Reverend Yi-Han Oh as the next stated clerk of our denomination. Yi-Han is currently the Mid-Council Ministries Director and in the office of the General Assembly. And in fact, I met her when I did my training to be a Mid-Council leader last year in Louisville. She was one of the ones that trained us, and boy, she is sharp and on the ball, and I'm very impressed with her and delighted that she was elected as our next stated clerk of the General Assembly. She will begin her work on August 1st, but until then, the interim stated clerk, Reverend Bronwyn Boswell, will continue her work. Reverend Boswell is the acting stated clerk and the first woman to be appointed or elected to lead the denomination in our over 300-year history of our church. Now, yesterday, July 2nd, the General Assembly began with worship with Reverend Professor Jerry Pillay, the General Secretary of the World Council of Churches. Let's listen just a little bit to his sermon.
The radicality of Jesus' call cannot be overstated. Yet such bold witness is hardly unknown in the PCUSA, whose very founding struck a historic chord for freedom and against slavery. Thirdly and lastly, Christian freedom is life in the Spirit. In Luke's narrative, we see Jesus returning to his hometown of Nazareth. The same Spirit that acknowledged him at his baptism, that drove him into the wilderness, and that enabled him there to renounce power, glory, and wealth, has led him home with a renewed sense of mission, identity, and purpose. And so in the synagogue, he boldly proclaims with Isaiah, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he has anointed me to bring good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim release to the captives and recovery of sight to the blind, to set free those who are oppressed, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor."
Then there was a report from the Bills and Overtures Committee who looked at the business of the Assembly and proposed a docket of the Assembly. We get these reports when maybe a committee takes longer than they anticipated, and the agenda has to be, or docket has to be revised. Also, we heard, and we've heard this regularly through each day of the Assembly, is a financial implication report telling us what the General Assembly per capita amount would be after some of the business of the Assembly was approved. So when business is approved by the General Assembly, that costs some money. They estimate that cost and then tell us what the per capita amount will be for next year and the year next after that. Some of you will know that Susquehanna Valley Presbytery submitted 2 overtures to the General Assembly, each of them dealing with the environment. They had other presbyteries that supported them, and one of those overtures was on becoming free from plastic pollution. Now, this overture passed the committee and was put on the consent agenda of the General Assembly, and that passed the other day. Special thanks to Chris Berger and Bruce Gillette, who went to the committees and was an advocate for that report, that overture. The other overture that we submitted on our presbytery behalf and other presbyteries ratified the other overture that we submitted on our presbytery behalf and other presbyteries ratified or supported that presbytery was titled "On Removal of Investments in and Subsidies for Fossil Fuels." Now, this overture came to the Assembly with the minority report. Now, a minority report is where some of the committee members of the committee that dealt with the overture thought that maybe there was needed to be a different direction. And so that committee brought forth to the Environmental and Climate Justice Committee this other report that they believed would be a little bit better. Now, our Presbytery report, in very brief words, simply wanted to say that all publicly traded companies whose primary source of income is derived from the exploration, development, and production of fossil fuels would be put on the Presbyterian Church USA's list of prohibited securities. The minority report said that this original overture didn't provide a process, namely the inclusion of the Committee on Mission Responsibility Through Investment, or an acronym MRTI, Mission Responsibility Through Investment. Now, MRTI was created in recognition of the church's unique mission responsibility to advance creatively through financial resources that is entrusted to it. MRTI implements the General Assembly's policies on social responsible investing, also sometimes called faith-based investing, by engaging corporations in which the church owns stock. Now, the discussion over this overture and another overture that I'll name in a minute, and its minority report from the committee was very complicated. What I heard was that there were many young adult advisory delegates that nearly pleaded the General Assembly to do more than what this overture and the minority report stated. They were concerned about caring for our earth, this good earth that God created for us. Now, some commissioners and other advisory delegates stood on the floor and said that we needed more as also to protect this earth. Now, debate on this overture went on for hours, and I believe that was approved and then disapproved, and there were other overtures that came in play, and then it was reconsidered. What took place was that there was this other overture, which was titled Response to the 225th General Assembly Directive on Applying Environmental Policy and Continuing Corporate Engagement. Now, in the middle of all of this, we heard about Hurricane Beryl, who was narrowing down with their twisty winds on some islands. The co-moderator stopped the assembly and prayed for those in harm's way. What was finally approved was an amendment to the overture that I just mentioned. Here are some of the words of the overture, not all of them, but just briefly some of the words. To prioritize responses to the urgent needs associated with the existential threats of climate crisis, including those related to limiting global warming. To commend the investigating agencies at the Presbyterian Church USA for their work to provide options for congregations, mid-councils, and individuals working for a fossil fuel-free future, and encourage Presbyterians to explore these options provided by the Presbyterian Investment and Loan Program, the Board of Pensions of the Presbyterian Church USA, and the Presbyterian Church USA Foundation, and the New Covenant Trust Company. To commend the 700 investors representing over 68 trillion in assets under management working through the Climate Action 100 Plus initiative to get the largest 170 corporate greenhouse gas emitters to manage operations in line with the goals of the Paris Agreement. And here's one of the amendments that got into what the Assembly approved. To direct MRTI, Mission Responsibility Investing, to immediately identify the top 10 fossil fuel companies that derive the majority of their profits from the exploration, development, and production of fossil fuels, and with which there will be no promising engagement, and immediately divest from those companies. and finally to direct MRTI to continue engaging companies identified by Climate Action 100 Plus. Now, for some, this was not enough. For others, it was just right. It was a step, maybe not a big step to help the environment, but one step. And so we move forward, trusting how God is working in all of this. Now, this committee also had a commissioner's resolution that one of our commissioners actually helped write. And this was to allow an official from the Department of the Treasury of our United States to address the Assembly about the Inflation Reduction Act. And although they didn't get as much time as they wanted for this official to address the Assembly, he did address the Assembly, telling churches what they could do to receive monies from the Treasury Department. Now, there'll be a webinar about this that he's going to do, so I encourage you to look on your screen about when that webinar is. I want to highlight two other committees. It was a long day yesterday. Two other committees, the International Engagement Committee and the Domestic Engagement Committee. The moderator of the International Engagement Committee brought a commissioner's resolution on reaching out in concern for the Presbyterian Reformed Church in Cuba and the people of Cuba, and an overture that pointed the Assembly to two resources: Why Palestine Matters by the Israel-Palestine Mission Network and Focus Palestine by the World Communion of Reformed Churches. This committee also brought to us on confessing our complicity in Christian Zionism. It's an effort to update and expand a resolution confronting Christian Zionism approved by the General Assembly back in 2004. And it calls for a study of the document addressed on the expansion of Christian Zionism in the years since the Assembly 2004 policy. And then before the next committee's report, the Domestic Engagement Committee's report, there was a pause in the Assembly for some technology issues, and the Assembly danced. It was sparked by one of the co-moderators, and the Assembly had fun. It was a joy to watch and a relief for some of us. The Domestic Engagement Committee, the moderator of that committee, brought forth a commissioner's resolution titled On Solitary Confinement, which urges Presbyterians to call upon their city, state, and federal elected officials to enact reforms in ending prolonged solitary confinement. It also calls upon legislators to prohibit solitary confinement for vulnerable populations, including juveniles, pregnant people, disabled people, and LGBTQAI+ persons. This item was amended and then passed. This committee also brought forth the final action for the General Assembly. It was calling for action so that children may live in a free from gun violence, and this action passed unanimously. Before the vote, we heard some horrific stories about gun violence, and the co-moderator of our General Assembly prayed for the Prince of Peace and asking that God's presence would be in the room that night. He prayed that great healer, work your power to heal this wounded nation and all its territories. Well, that was the action from yesterday. A long day, and today is another long one. So be in tune with Facebook and our Facebook page of our presbytery to hear the other reports that I will give. Grace and peace.